Okay, so I guess we are on time. Let me kick this off the session. Uh, can you hear me right?
We can.
Okay. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the new session of Sitecore User Group Jaipur. This time we are delighted to have Kelly Rusk with us to present on his topic. Allow me to provide a brief introduction to Kelly. He's a Sitecore MVP and Sitecore SME at Glowtech. He's also an active Sitecore committee member. So I would like to hand over this session to Kelly. And Kelly, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, and good day, everyone. Thank you for taking time out to meet with me. Today, I want to hopefully uh, talk about Sitecore troubleshooting, kind of a 101. And my goal here is to give you maybe one thing you've not considered that can make your life easier, because oftentimes Sitecore is not the problem as we're developing and building sites or deploying sites, whatever your role may be. But there might be some things we want to take out of the equation. So today we're going to talk about something Sitecore, something's development, something's Azure DevOps or DevOps, whatever you're following. And the goal again is to help you. So we'll run through some of these key points, and then we'll open up for some good questions. And what I hope is just a dialogue. I'm here as a resource for you. So with that, we'll kick in. And today we're going to talk about a few things. I want to talk about kind of common troubleshooting scenarios that we tend to see, weird things I've seen from the field. So that's sort of the funny stuff that's happened. I have a troubleshooting kind of step-by-step guide. And after the presentation, I will make this a PDF and I'll send it along so you have it. How to prevent problems before they happen, and some of my favorite tools and methods. And any questions before we begin? Okay. During then, we'll jump right in and talk about some of the common cyber scenarios you might find yourself in. One of the first things we see a lot is kind of slow loading on startup. And this is, the cache and might not be built yet. Maybe you deployed and it caused a reset of the Sitecore application, and you might need a warm up. So there's a few different ways to manage this, right? So we can talk about uh, application initialization if you're not experienced with that. Um, and that's very helpful. Application initialization, if you've not used it, is very common in PaaS as well when you scale instances, because you can do what's known as a remap page. And the remap page sends your user to like a temporary page while Sitecore is warming up in the background. You can do that on any infrastructure if as long as you have access to IIS. And then warm-up scripting and tuning is very important. So you can run warm-up scripts. You can write your own PowerShell and maybe connect it and run it on warm-up. We use BlazeMeter as part of our Azure DevOps pipeline. So when we deploy our different stage gates, which we'll talk about later, we'll actually deploy and have the warm-up script run before we swap things into production. So that's kind of the first scenario we see a lot, and some ways to address that. Slow page load, right? We'll see that a lot. Do we have heavy or bad code? Too many redirects? Could we having bots attack? And when we say bots, I don't mean just bad bots. I mean good bots too. You might be getting indexed by Google too aggressively. Um, do you need a Sitecore patch? Maybe something's happening in session state. Um, have you tuned your cache? And if you have a lot of cache evictions, what happens in caching, and I've got a blog post about this as well, is you have a very high CPU process that happens when it creates the cache, and then it commits to memory. So both your memory and CPU get utilized, and you get a hit there that can slow down your site. Session state can really play a role here, and maybe your marketing campaigns are a little too weighty. So some things to consider that you see when you have a slow page load. And the worst case scenario is what if your page doesn't load? Could that be a network or a code error? And we're going to walk through that 12 steps to kind of resolve that, to evaluate, how do we isolate if a page is not loading? If you see assets on a page not loading when you're using the CDN, as your cache cleared, is your CDN configuration correctly? Maybe you have stale images where you just need to make sure you're regularly having your time to live or your configuration such. And there's a lot of configuration to do with the CDN especially if you look at something like Cloudflare that can help you identify uh, and make sure you remediate your image quality. If you are having custom solar cores, and again, I got another blog post, we'll share that blog here as well. Is your configuration correct to talk to your custom cores? Uh, are you using rebuild cores? If you don't use rebuild cores a day, you need to use rebuild cores. So that's, for example, you might have Sitecore web index and Sitecore web index underscore rebuild. And that allows you to have an operation called switch on rebuild in Solar Cloud so that when you're rebuilding your indexes, you rebuild someone that's not being used by the application quite yet. And once it completes rebuilding the index, it swaps it in. So that helps you to make sure you don't get downtime where you're waiting while the index is getting rebuilt. And lastly, do you have a high acquire request state? And that might be your session state, and that means you need to tune your session state. Again, I've got several resources on tuning your session state, and I'll chat those in once we're through the presentation. So, any questions so far about some of the common Sitecore troubleshooting scenarios we see? Has anyone ran into these issues before?
Uh, Not really. But I do have one question that is more
Sure.
related to different breakpoints in the media performance kind of thing.
Yes,
Maybe
ask
we
away.
can. So, let's say we have some media, right? So for desktop, we will require large media. For mobile, we required a small one. For tab, it's not that
Yes.
case. So, what is the best practice? Like you suggest, should we have different media for these three breakpoints, or should we dealt it with some Dynova and like image parameters, or anything else? Like, what do
So,
you suggest?
so the best practice that we tend to see, and we go headless on our front end development, is that we use responsive design, and we have our images loaded. We offload everything to Cloudflare as an edge device. So your images and heavy things, even your JavaScript and CSS, you really should offload to an edge device like Cloudflare or an Azure CDN or Front Door. That allows the images with the image sizes. They should be dynamically resizing if you're responsive in your design. From a Google SEO and Lighthouse perspective, you definitely still need to include the image height and width so it can pre-render the space you're going to go into and use a responsive design. So you like use a flex, flex box or grid, and just make sure those images are up in a CDN in a great setting that Cloudflare has. Is it has different tiers, so it will serve the location closest to you as a user, and then you can have that globally distributed. So you definitely want to offload the heaviest part of your applications, and that's where the edge device and caching of your images comes into place. And there's a lot of additional tuning you can do in your edge devices. They offer a lot of stuff when it comes to media, even video compression and delivery. Did that help answer that question?
Okay, so if I'm taking it correctly, so you mean to say maybe we can use that CDN and based on whatever our breakpoint is, maybe we can have some utility which can take care of the size and then
Yes.
set that particular image accordingly, right? So here the thing is like let's say if we load same image in all the breakpoints, right? So in that case
Yes.
it will take that particular amount of time, and then the CSS comes into the picture and it resizes that based on the uh, uh, devices, right? But here the thing is we should only load the image based on the breakpoint so that it won't
Yes,
impact the
correct.
performance.
Yes, you want to use your media queries in CSS. So you use your media queries, identify your breakpoints, and put them up into the edge device. All your CSS files with the media breakpoints. The media breakpoints are a key point. Media queries are a key aspect of responsive design, and that's what we leverage. And you can have the same base image, and then your media queries say, okay, serve it up as smaller. So as you flex the screen back and forth from small mobile web all the way up to tablet and then desktop, you now have your media queries detect that, but the media still lives on the edge device.
Okay, so do you prefer any tool for this?
Yes, Cloudflare. I heavily
Cloudflare.
use Cloudflare, and they do a lot
Okay,
of image delivery aspects. It's really easy to leverage, and that's for serious enterprises. I would highly recommend Cloudflare always, or Azure Front Door. I always like to have an edge device. Azure CDN is great for this too. So Azure or Cloudflare would be my choices for that.
okay, and like we also have Dianoga, right? So will it also help over here?
It could, absolutely, absolutely it will, and that's where you get into that local caching. Is remember what it does is it takes that load off your application servers, um, and your user cache Cloudflare can compress and only send you a small bit. And you want to make sure you're not having on your pages. You also want to detect we talk about slow page load. We talk about heavier bad code. You want to remove unused JavaScript and unused CSS. And we're going to talk in a few slides about some tools to use to really expose that and identify, well, am I only loading what I need on that page? So for low network situations, I'm going to jump ahead for a second and say I like to use Google Lighthouse as a detector. And one of the things I like to do is um, it measures across a 3G connection. So its baseline is very, very low bandwidth. So you're kind of forced, if you want to have a good Lighthouse score, you're forced to really remove all the unnecessary stuff from your page. So when you build out your web page, and certainly going headless in Sitecore helps, you're only loading the images and assets you need. You only load the JavaScript and CSS you need. For example, in our current project that I'm on, we use Helix. We've gone very modular and so each of the features only load the CSS they need. We don't have one giant CSS file for everything across the site. We have a very basic CSS file for maybe the site brand, and then we have feature-specific CSS and JavaScript. And what it allows us to do is to load only what's necessary on the page.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
I guess
Great question.
thank you. And we have Vishwas. He also has some questions. So maybe like Vishwas, please go ahead.
Yeah,
Yes.
um, yeah. Hello, Kelly. So
Hello.
my question is about custom solar core. So like
Yes.
in one of my project, we were having different regions and
Yes.
different region environments and region specific solar cores. And we were facing issues like sometimes the index were getting out of sync.
Yes. It's a common
So
issue, and
mhm,
I don't recommend solar instances per region
mhm,
unless you have a dedicated CD tied to that. So you would have to do what in that situation if you want to do regional solar.
mhm,
And the problem is you have to make sure your publishing strategy is really good. Um, what you want to do is something like Azure, you can use Traffic Manager and have
mhm,
separate CDs and make sure that those CD configs per region that you're using for Traffic Manager or separate app services or maybe separate CD servers have their own solar infrastructure and that your CMS publishes to all the different indexes. You don't want to try to use solar replication across the regions. It's a speed of light issue and it can cause several issues. And well, it's actually one of the things that we talk about here.
Yeah, I mean, we do have traffic manager and separate series which were pointing to those solar cores. But I
Yes.
just wanted to understand it's more kind of a configuration part only. We'll need to look for these kind of issues when index goes out of sync.
Yeah, and that's hard. I've had a lot of issues with solar replicating. And so are you trying to replicate between solar to keep it in sync, or are you publishing to each of your regions to keep it in sync if you're doing
Publishing
rebuild?
e each of our regions.
And it goes out of sync.
Uh,
is it successful in rebuilding each custom core?
it rebuilds, but what happens like whenever maybe client publish something, so in one of the region it get out of sync. It's
Okay,
not
so they're not
every
pub
time that. Mhm.
so I would say you have some publishing governance here as well, where we need to make sure that they're publishing to each of the regions when they hit the publish button. So that way, really, it should be like a branch. Each region should be a branch from your trunk, right? The CMS is your
Mhm.
trunk. You should only have one CMS, right?
Yeah.
So if you have one CMS, you need a publishing target for each of those regions. And when your content editor works, they have to publish to each of those regions in order to keep it in sync.
Mhm.
Because those indexes should rebuild if you tied those regional solars to a regional CD with Traffic Manager.
Okay, thank you.
But I would definitely make sure that every time they publish, it goes to each region. Or you could write a handler to make sure anytime somebody does a publish, it does the publishing for them for the other regions. Like an on-publish end event
Mhm.
that automatically rebuilds the indexes. But you'd also want to make sure it gets published to each separate web database that you have in each region. I'm assuming you have a web database in each region, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect.
We
Yeah.
are.
So I would try that, making sure that they publish each region. That might be at the source of some of the challenges. Uh, because if they don't publish each region, you're also missing the items, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And let's make it easy for our content authors. Maybe automate what you can behind the scenes and look at that publish end event.
Yeah, we
Is
have
it
done some automation as well, like timely rebuilding those indexes to at least avoid these kind of inconsistencies, to at
sure?
least avoiding these
But,
issues.
but if they don't publish the item, the index does it can't read it either. So publishing
Mhm.
plays a role here for sure. Which gets into our next couple of batch of common Sitecore scenarios, right? We see null errors, and that could be like publishing templates or bad code releases. So you always got to make sure you test, test, test. Intermittent solar results. Boy, we just talked about that, didn't we? Right? So are you not publishing maybe to your regional aspects? Um, are you using switch on rebuild properly? Do you have primary, secondary nodes instead of solar cloud? Hopefully you're leveraging solar cloud. But intermittent solar results. I promise I did not type this on the next slide as we talked about your challenge. But that's a very common thing that we see out in the world. We might see intermittent errors depending on the CDs. So maybe you have sticky sessions, or maybe the code is not the same code base on both CDs or even instances. So sometimes in Azure, when they do like a Microsoft platform update, that instance might not get updated properly. And so might have to restart your Azure instance to Azure App Service to get the instances to replicate. You might see CMS publishing being slow, and that could be, publishing in multiple languages, because each time you publish, if I have 12 languages, you think you're publishing once, you're actually publishing 12 times. So if I publish 100 items, on now I've published 1,200 or 120 times. So there's a magnitude when you have languages when you're publishing. Are you properly using the publishing service? Do you have workflows and publishing governance so you don't have a very long publishing event queue, so to speak? For those that are still using XNect, I apologize. But if you might have some XNect errors as well. This gets into your certificates, maybe your networking and connectivity. Remember, XNect, there are several roles that have to work together to be successful. And you have to be aware of that and make sure you check those. And then lastly, another thing we see is composable components. If you've gone composable Sitecore, maybe using Sitecore Personalize, Sitecore Search. Is your networking working properly? Is everything communicating well over its connectors? Is your licensing in place? Because each of these things are really separate of each other. So they're like separate little systems. So if you're composable, you need to be aware of the logs that they have for those aspects that you're using. And you might open up Sitecore and say, "Wow, my search is not working," but you need to go maybe to Sitecore Search and go into there to see what the issue is. So any questions about these before we jump into some weird and funny things I've seen in the field? And great
Can you
questions
please
so far.
describe one thing? Like here you mentioned primary or secondary nodes insist
Yes.
of solar cloud. So can
Yeah.
you give
So
bit
that's
detail about it? Yeah.
yes, that's the old solar. So that's like when you had the primary, secondary, master, slave in old solar. So like your local solar, I recommend you even test solar. So when you stand up solar locally, um, still recommend you use Solar Cloud, even if it's a single node. Solar Cloud is a technology. You don't need to have multiple nodes to test Solar Cloud. The old way in using solar, you had a primary and maybe secondary nodes. I don't recommend using that. So I recommend if you're using primary and secondary, you should move to Solar Cloud instead. And for example, in our local instances, we actually do all our development in local Docker, and we have a Solar Cloud instance. It's one instance of Solar, one node running Solar Cloud. It just doesn't have any replication or Zookeeper installed because we don't need to, based on having not having multiple nodes. So if you're not using Solar Cloud, make sure you're on Solar Cloud. Does that help answer the question?
Yep.
Thank you. Now, do y'all want to see the ridiculous things I've come across from the field and hopefully a few laughs? All right, so here's some really fun stuff I've seen from the field that was like, what is going on here? And this is my little weird person. This is exactly the face I had as we're trying to troubleshoot. Like, what is going on here? So we had some intermittent failures for some users in web apps, but not others. And that was because when we redeployed in Azure, it didn't apply the code across the instances, and sticky sessions were in use. So it was an Azure issue where the instances were stuck. And it was right after a Microsoft platform update, where some of the instances thought they were, instead of replicating like it normally does, so normally when you deploy to Azure in a web app, it will copy what you deploy to the other instances. Let's say you have 6 instances in your web application. It should be exact copies, but Microsoft had a hiccup. And with sticky sessions on top of it, we had some users having the old code, some getting the new code, and we couldn't figure out why until we did a stop and then a start all the way through of the application. So that was kind of weird. We had to spotlight traffic on another client, and we found out that they were actually having a hacking competition. So they were DDoSing themselves this whole time, and they're wondering what's going on, why they're having these spikes and things and getting hacked, it looked like. And and they were in the middle of the hacking competition as they're going live with production. And that was a 24-hour nightmare. No one could figure out what was going on until the business said, "Oh yeah, we put a hacking competition out there. We just forgot to tell everyone about it." And so all these hackers were, trying to get money for hacking the website, and it was taking down their website. So have anyone experienced these things yet so far? And a nightmare cases, right? We had a site showing no traffic, but visiting the site was horrible response time, and that was because the site was redirected. They had gone to a new infrastructure. They had migrated from on-premises virtual machines to Azure Web Apps, and in one case containers, and they were still the DNS was pointing to the old site. So doing all these changes, and they were wondering, hey, why is my site not showing up? It's because they were still redirecting out to their old site and not fixed their redirects. And it was on certain pages too. So it was not only the whole site. We found after fixing the whole site issue and domain pointing that individual pages going to an old thing and the way they were resolving the domains was not properly set up. So it was an absolute mess. We were like, why are we on the old site when it should have been on the new site? This next one was very painful. This took about a week to figure out, and we used logging to figure it out as well. But the site was magically showing errors on any changes. I put this in quotes. So we say, are you changing your code? It looks like your code is changing. They said, no, 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 we're not changing our code. But one of their teammates was deploying code, but not telling anyone. So they didn't have any governance around their DevOps processes. And once we got in and we looked at when files were changing, we're like, hold on a second. You're telling us and you're blaming the Sitecore platform, and you're saying there's no code changes at all. But right here, your files are magically changing. We can see the dates, we can see the times. What's happening here? And we tracked it down and we saw a user finally in their DevOps on deployments. And we found out that they were in fact deploying code. and they just weren't telling anyone, so they weren't even communicating, and that was a quite large nightmare. And another one that we saw a lot was, CDs were not loading, and we're like, what's going on? Load testing them fine, and they deployed the CMS role over the CD. So you have to be careful of the include files. If you're going to do a role require, like my role is a CMS versus content delivery node, you want to make sure that you have the right role in your deployment. So when you're deploying, make sure that the right files are in place. If you're going to have one single source to deploy from, like here's all my Sitecore code, make sure you use include files that say, okay, well, this one's role is the CMS. This one is for the CDS. So make sure you separate those things out and not deploy to the wrong code base. Has anyone experienced anything like this before? Or are these just scary stories that make you want to cry? You ready for some more scary stories?
Yeah, like in my experience, the boat like traffic, that was something we have observed.
Yeah, it's hard. Bots are hard. And bot traffic is like warfare. There's very, very advanced algorithms that can trick systems. So those that are being malicious bots, they can imitate like what a user looks like. So they're not just in the past, bots were simple. They would hammer your site. You'd see a lot of the traffic coming from one IP address, and then you'd be like, oh, I'm just going to block that IP address. But now the bots are very complex and they're acting like users. So they're maybe hitting you once every 2 seconds or maybe 5 seconds, back down to half second. So it's looking like real users and they're coming from multiple IP addresses and spoofing. So it can get very, very advanced.
Mhm.
And some other fun stuff I've seen. Um, we had unexplained load every Monday on the CD, and someone enabled the Sitecore admin log on the CD server instead of using the CMS, and editors are using the CD server. So every Monday they were publishing and editing, but they were using the content delivery node instead of using the CMS for publishing. So that was a nightmare we had to unravel. Um, this one was fun. The site was stopping every night, then coming back in the morning. And like, why is it going to sleep? And people looking at sleep settings, all these aspects, and we dug through Azure and we found an Azure automation job that normally runs on dev, and that was to save money. So each night it would say, hey, let's shut down the app service so we can save money. Because if your app service is running, that's one thing in Azure you can stop, and then you can restart it when you're ready to start working again. But they had accidentally had that job running against production. So in the middle of the night, their site was just shutting down at 10 p.m. and no one could figure out why. So that was very painful, and that cost that business a lot of money, as you can imagine. And this is fun. Um, so this was why I say use Solar Cloud. Solar is being rebuilt, but old data was showing up on the site depending on the user. And the CDs hit a load balancer in front of the primary, secondary solar environment, aka the old solar that had a master and slave setup. And when in secondary, it was looking at the rebuilt index. It wasn't looking. Um, and this is a problem because everything was not replicating properly due to a really replication issue. As a solar limitation. And moving to Solar Cloud resolved this because in Solar Cloud, you have Zookeeper that keeps a quorum over your node, so you don't have a primary that has all the content. And back in the day, you would publish to your CMS, and that was your primary node, and then you would hope it would replicate out to the secondaries. But the way they set up that load balancer, um, it included the master and the slave servers. Um, so the replication was not, when they'd hit it, it wasn't getting the right data. Ideally, they should have had multiple secondary servers, like master for the CMS, and then your CDs reading from secondary one, secondary two, secondary three nodes, and that would have resolved the issue. And by that point, you're very close to Solar Cloud and running in a quorum, and so that's what we recommend using Solar Cloud. And lastly, the site was showing errors using Sitecore Commerce. This was a very painful experience. And one of the recommendations that came out was um, they, they had deployed the wrong version of the Commerce engine and used custom DLLs. So be very, very careful. And that's what I always say is you want to extend the Sitecore platform, um, not try to replace the core DLLs that run Sitecore. At that point, you've created a Frankencore, like Frankenstein, and it's not going to work very well. So this is just a few examples of the horrible and crazy things we've seen in the field. These are all-nighters that really had everyone questioning. And a lot of these come down to governance and making sure you communicate well on your solution and what's going on. But how do we treat these things? Here's kind of a 12-step runbook that I like to use when I'm troubleshooting Sitecore. And the first thing I always ask when I come across an issue is, what changed? And it could be code, it could be networking. I'm sorry, is there a question? Okay.
No, you can continue. We have questions, so maybe we can cover that later.
Okay, great. So what changed? Was there a clear code change on the site? Or a clear error? I'm sorry, was there a clear error code? Whether that's infrastructure or the Sitecore logs. So I love to use Datadog to kind of centralize all my logs and all my infrastructure. I get a single view of what's going on, and I can see if there's issues, networking issues, latency issues, infrastructure issues. So if you have a clear error code, we need to surface that quickly. Number three, was there a recent deployment, networking change, large publishing, or a spike in traffic? So that can cause errors as well. And this is in the order of operation that when I go down. Four, what's in the APM and Sitecore logs? So again, logging's your friend. Application performance monitoring like New Relic or App Dynamics, or even Azure Application Insights, you can look at that and ask and look at the transactions and see what's going on and start tracing. So by step 4, you should have an error what's going on. Step 5 is, looking at the front-end web servers or web apps and asking, what's wrong? Is the load too high? Are we maybe getting attacked? Or maybe our solution is so big or we have so much traffic that we need to scale out more to accommodate our users. And then if that's not the front-end servers are the issue, look at your application servers or your web apps. Is Xnet misbehaving? Maybe your composable components, are they having issues? Like Sitecore Search or Sitecore Personalize. We see a lot of Xconnect issues. If you're using Xconnect and reporting, there's a lot of things that we have to work together to make it work, especially with certificates. So is Xconnect working? So by number 6, you should have identified a lot of your core infrastructure. And then you're getting to questions like, is my session state working on number 7? How's my database backend? And I would say this strongly, if you're using Azure SQL for your databases, make sure you have a job that is doing cleanup of your database. You have to make sure that you tune that database and keep it nice and performant. So making sure that you have enough size in your database, that the traffic to and from is working well, and that you're cleaning up that fragmentation that naturally happens with databases is really important. And then we get into Solar. Is Solar working properly? If you have a whole web page depending on Solar, and Solar's having issues, you now have an issue. And looking as we get to number 10, this is kind of the hard one. And this is where you need to work with infrastructure teams, is we're looking at, what's the performance of the networking or edge devices? Is Cloudflare having an issue? Are there outages on the in your network? Maybe a firewall went down or has an issue or is blocking traffic. Or perhaps there was a change there that was causing issues. Maybe you've got certificates that are not matching properly, or have expired thumbprints, or not matching thumbprints or expired. And number 11, this back to the bot wars. Do you have unexpected or unwanted traffic? So bots not are always bad, right? Maybe you have unexpected traffic. Maybe your marketing team, and I'm sure you all have seen this, did not notify you that they were doing a marketing campaign, and now you're getting millions of visits on your website, and you weren't aware, so you couldn't scale up in time, right? So that maybe is where you want to use auto scaling, or really think about, how do I scale and make sure I have enough headroom for the traffic we're going to get. And lastly, number 12 is always revisit. Are you sure there are no recent deployments of large publishing? If so, maybe you need a Sitecore Inc. support ticket to find out you need a Sitecore patch. And notice here that the Sitecore Inc. support review or ticket is at the very last. 90% of the time, your issues are in the first 11 steps. Usually it's code. 80% of the time it's a code release that's caused the issue. Another 10% of the time to 50% of the time, it's going to be your networking or a configuration. So I think about the 4 C's, and I got a blog post about this. It's your code, configuration, right? So those are the two one, and you've got your content, and then your cloud platform and infrastructure. So those are the 4 C's. So check out the 4 C's. Maybe you have bad content, and bad content is causing an issue where somebody didn't publish the right thing or did not publish anything at all, or maybe it's not on site. So look at your code, look at your configuration, look at your content, then look at your cloud platform or infrastructure to determine where the issue lives. So I'm going to pause here for a second. Are are any of these steps helpful? And the order of the steps, does it make sense as far as why the run book?
Yeah, definitely they are.
Great. And I'll make sure
And
to PDF this. Yes, go ahead.
sure.
Any
We
questions?
have one question. Yeah, we have one question from Sumit, and it's
Yes,
related to X Connect and analytics. So he's saying
sure.
regarding X Connect errors and analytics are also empty sometimes. So
Yes.
what is the root cause of it?
Well, it can be, most of the times it's going to be certificates of communication. So you want to look at your logs and make sure that they're working together. Because remember, in XNEC, there are multiple roles, marketing automation to reporting that all have to work together. Um, you on the inverse problem, sometimes you have too much XConnect data. So you need to make sure that you prune out your XConnect. And I've got several blog posts. I've got a whole list of blog posts. I'll pull up my blog in a moment, and we're gonna walk through some of these blog posts I spoke to, and I'll screen share that out because I want to walk through that once we're done with the presentation. And we'll walk through how to make sure your connection streams are right, that your certificates are right. Most of the time, it's your certificates and communication between the XNET roles that cause the issue. And we'll walk through some of those blog posts to talk through that. And before we talk about that, let's talk about how to prevent issues before they happen, right? Because we don't always want to be reacting to an issue. We want to be proactive. So a few tips here is, make sure you have source control for your Sitecore role, or use includes that target or role require. Like for this particular, if I'm going to have one source control for all of my Sitecore bits, make sure that when you have include files, that you know which one needs to be deployed on the CMS or CD server. And that's simple as saying will require content management or standalone, will require equals content delivery. So those values are in your web.config. Make sure you have a clear DevOps governance. And it also prepares you for AKS, PaaS, or SaaS, right? So how do you deploy? Who's allowed to deploy? Do you have stage gates? And I can't emphasize enough, load test, load test, load test, and load environment like size. So my staging environment matches production. And what I do is I scale up staging before I go live. I load test against that in isolation and production to make sure everything's working well before I deploy. And I highly recommend, if you don't use a WAF right now, web application firewall and a CDN, use a WAF and a CDN. You want to protect yourself from these bot traffics because you cannot win trying to fight bots without application firewall. Something like Cloudflare has both a WAF and a CDN. A CDN is very useful to taking load off your site and delivering an optimized experience for your users. So you also want to implement publishing governance and workflows. If you have a large publishing jobs and issues there, it's going to be very difficult. So try to make sure that you have control over your content, because we've had some people get sued because they published the wrong content or had the wrong information. So you want to be very careful about what's being published and implement workflows. If you have a bad deployment, roll back and don't try to fix it in production. This is where, having zero downtime deployments or deployment slots or blue-green environment is very helpful. Make sure you can swap back and forth. So don't try to fix it. Roll back immediately, fix the issue, and then roll it forward. It can be very challenging to try to fix stuff in, basically code in production. You also want to properly scale your infrastructure and edge devices. So what I recommend is a monthly review of your performance to make sure that you're meeting what you need. The load testing we mentioned in the previous slide is very helpful as well. And for XConnect and especially third-party integrations, check your certificates and make sure your third-party integrations can access your site. That's very, very important, or else you're going to end up in a lot of challenges because maybe they can't communicate properly. So when we talk about deploying again, don't override databases. That's something I'm very passionate about. Use content seeking and replicate your content. Um, when you do deployments and you're just replacing the database, you can get artifacts in place, like your event table, um, your events, your queuing, and that can cause a lot of issues. So let's be very careful about that. So I don't recommend that each time you deploy that you create your database all over again. Instead, I would say use Sitecore Sidekick if you're synchronizing across environments, publishing. That can be very helpful. Um, From a launching perspective, if you're first launching a site, do a soft launch and load test production before going live. So basically, your launch day should not be, let's deploy the code and point all the traffic to it. Your launch day should be, I deployed the code a week ago. I created dummy URLs or dummy domains so people could test against that. And now I'm just going to finally swap the traffic to that. So that way you can smoke test and make sure your new site's live and ready to go using dummy URLs to make sure everything's working before you switch over. We do that, and our go lives for new brands consist of only 2 minutes. And that's when we point the DNS to it. So we talk about best practices or any configurations. Please adhere to Sitecore's best practices. Follow them. Don't get creative, because if you get creative, the next person who comes in to try to clean up the code is going to have problems, right? So try your best to stick to good include files and not overriding your default DLLs. That's going to be very helpful. And one of the last things I recommend, is using stage gates in your DevOps. So that means that deploy to the dev environment, make sure you test there. Everything must pass the testing before it goes to QA. Everything must pass QA before it goes to staging. Staging is where you do a lot of your UAT. You've already done regression testing, hopefully in QA. Load test staging, and then promote to production. Don't skip any of the environments. Don't skip any of the governance, because you should have regression testing to make sure that when you deploy a new feature, it doesn't break another one. And we talk about your QA and UAT scope, make sure it's automate what you can, and what you need manual. Make sure it's very clearly defined. This is where I love BlazeMeter, because BlazeMeter, I can do all these user testing. If you're not used BlazeMeter or a comparable tool, I recommend testing that and have your QA team build up use cases. And then you can execute against those. And we find it to be very, very helpful. And you can write Selenium scripts, right? Essentially, BlazeMeter is our Selenium scripts in the back end. So if you use Selenium scripts, make sure those are up to date and run those automated fashion. We use Azure DevOps for our deployments, and we automatically have regression testing run based on our test suite. And every time we add a new feature, we have a new test that we add to the test suite. And now when we deploy the next feature batch, it's now running maybe 50 tests to make sure everything's good. And you can't plan for everything. Disasters do happen. So get a disaster recovery environment. Test what a failover looks like. So maybe once a quarter, you might test what a failover is so you can be prepared for it. And the number one rule that I like to follow that I broke today, and many of us broke already, we're all in trouble here, is don't deploy on Friday. If you can, just because you might have resources and you don't want to have to work all weekend to fix something. So any questions about the kind of preventing problems before they happen, or are you already using some of these methods? And I'll wait in case there are questions.
We do deploy on Friday, but now we'll take care.
Yes, it's okay. That the deploy on Fridays can become less and less of a concern because if you have your DevOps going well, it's really, really good. So there's options here. We can definitely do some things here that can make it easier.
Right, but we at least make sure that we do it early in the morning so that we'll have
Yes.
whole day
to troubleshoot
Yes.
if anything comes up.
Yep. And something that we do is using those deployment slots, you should be able to test everything. So if you're doing a blue green, I highly recommend blue green or a poor man's blue green for your content delivery. Um, you should be you can deploy and test for a week, and then you do the swap. So you don't always have to deploy code and swap at the same time. So I always recommend separating the two activities, and that reduces your risk. So when you swap in and say here's a new code, um, you have a chance to review it. So while there is CDCI, and you could do continuous integration, continuous deployment, or CI/CD, um, maybe you don't want to do continuous deploy if there's issues. And if you're going to use CI/CD or CI/CD plus, make sure your continuous deployments that you have a rapid failback if there's issues, so you can fix it. So let me share a couple of my favorite tools. We'll jump into my blog for a few minutes so I can talk about some of the Xconnect resources, and we'll wrap up and have a great weekend. Um, so some of my favorite tools, this is an older tool, Sitecore Log Analyzer. You can still find it and download it. It allows you to grab Sitecore logs and it will find the errors. You can search for date ranges. There's a lot of cool stuff to do. Um, one of the favorite methods I have for troubleshooting, I kind of follow the traffic method, in which I follow like the user experience or user journey to isolate issues. So I say, okay, a user came and visited the site. They went to this feature. Where did the error happen? And allows me to emulate instead of going back from the very back end database server. You might have it where the user journey was they went to go log in, but the login issue was maybe they forgot their password. So don't waste time starting on the back end. Start in the user journey and follow that user journey to find out what's going on. There's a ton of built-in Sitecore admin tools, like you can do database viewing. So if you've not gone to control panel lately, go into your control panel and check out the admin tools. There's a ton of great stuff there. I also recommend don't ever go live at an APM. There's so many business transactions and .NET tracing you can do, and let the APM do the heavy work for you. And so like New Relic or a comparable APM, like even Azure Application Insights. I mean, not the logging part. There's an APM part you can turn on. It can give you a lot of good information on all your transactions. Um, I love load testing. As you can't tell already, I tend to obsess about load and all those things. So use load testing tools with intelligence. While you could use like a JMeter just to hit things, do something that can do a full user journey, like BlazeMeter, Loadster, or SmartBear. These are three great tools, and they can emulate the past. So instead of just hitting your home page 1,000 times and saying, "Oh, we're good," you can actually create a whole path and say, go to the home page, click on this page, activate this personalized component, and then log in to the portal that we have that's customer facing. You can actually write that script and load test that. And now what you've done is more emulated what your real users have and more what your real load is going to be like. From a analytics perspective, I really like GT metrics for point in time analysis. PageSpeed's Insights is really good, but one thing a lot of people forget is that it's a 28-day trailing data set. So a Google PageSpeed Insights, when you go make a change to your code and you evaluate PageSpeed Insights, you might see that it doesn't change very much. It's because it has 28 days of data. So unless that 28 days are up, you're not going to see the complete goodness of your code yet. As the 28 days continue, you might see it start to improve with your code change. That's because it has 28 days worth of data in place. Something that doesn't have 28 data, but is using lab data is Google Lighthouse. So if you've not used Google Lighthouse, I open up Chrome. We'll do that in a second, and you can run a Google Lighthouse report, and that's going to help show you where your site's really struggling. It's based on a 3G connection, and for kicks, we'll run a Lighthouse report on my Bits That Byte blog, and you'll see where I need to make improvements. Some other tools, I love Azure DevOps for automation and custom Azure dashboards. So I love seeing what's going on in Azure and creating custom Azure dashboards if I don't have Datadog for my kind of centralized tool. I really feel that's a great, great tool. In fact, I'm just going to mention, I'm going to just put Datadog right here. Datadog's great for tracking, centralized viewing your infrastructure. You can have what's known as a single pane of glass. We can see everything at your fingertips. Um, from a content perspective, for content syncing and database comparisons, I love sidekicking. Razzle's good, Unicorn Sync, and OpenDB Diff is another great tool. So OpenDB Diff is just a SQL tool. It's not Sitecore specific, but allows you to compare database differences. And it's, again, very, very powerful. And three of the last things I really like is, reach out to Sitecore community. We're always here to help. We love helping each other and working together. The Sitecore KB, there's a lot of known issues that are out there already. So go to the support.sitecore.com/KB. You'll be surprised. You might find your answer quickly there. And lastly, all is failing, open up a Sitecore support ticket. We've got a lot of good knowledge here in the Sitecore support world. So I'm going to pause here for a second. We're going to jump over to my blog, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, sure.
And can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Great. And let me chat this in. There's a few of these blog posts we talked about in the call, and I want to make sure you have them available for you as resources. So let me chat in some of these. I see some of the comments now. They're good comments. Oh, Log Expert, great tool. Dirk, thank you so much. That's perfect. So here's the site. So when we talk about XConnect, which I know you've had some issues there. There's a few key resources here on XConnect as far as like the resources for managing XConnect. And these are all the things I've compiled here. It's all the guides that I have for like how to troubleshoot XConnect issues, how to manage log retention, including XConnect, load balancing XConnect, XConnect with values, what roles do they have? So as an example, this goes into each role and what client certificates are supposed to match and the associated client thumbprint. This is where most people get tripped up. So this breaks out what certificates belong to which from a client perspective, all the way down to endpoint communication, all the ports that you need to open, how we communicate those out. So these resources are very helpful, and it talks through uh, really how to isolate and work with these. And then this one is an older blog post on client certificates, but it's very helpful for even XConnect as far as making sure you have the right connections all the way through, because you get errors like this all the time, and they'll say, oh, okay, talk to your admin, and you're screaming, but I am the admin. What do I do? And this is where you want to look at your client certificates again and make sure they're in place. So a lot of good XNX resources here that I would say is key to share. For governance, I actually love to talk about governance a lot. So let's go over here and search about governance. So there's some things about how to create governance policies. I have a whole guide right down here for redirects and how to manage redirects properly so you don't run into issues. And all the way down here, we get down to the bottom. Sitecore governance, how to in a template. To have a whole presentation about how to create governance. But this is how to set up governance, and we have an actual governance plan template you can download and use. So again, very powerful tools here and knowledge, and I want to share that. And there's just, if you go through my blog, you're going to find a lot of these sort of troubleshooting infrastructure and DevOps aspects in place. So is that helpful as kind of a start in?
It's really great. Thanks for sharing it. And I guess if Sumit can see it before, maybe it solves its purpose because he had
Yes.
issue with XConnect. So I guess you already have a good amount of blogs related to that. So yeah, I guess it will help all of us. So maybe like
Great.
we all of us should visit it once. And
Sure.
I really like the title, The Beats That
Oh,
Bite.
oh yeah, we have fun with it. So here's
Yeah.
something that's fun. Let me switch back to a mobile view. Um, do you see this performance, this lighthouse right here? And I did this in inspect in Chrome.
Yep.
So I can create let's do it for desktop. I can analyze my page load and it's doing an audit right now against my website. Now, it's not built in Sitecore. It is WordPress, so I'll be open about that. But this computes my score, and like PageSpeed Insights, it generates reports. And you can see I do obsess about performance, as you can tell. So you can see for my I like to be in the 90s for everything that I do. Um, but this is very helpful. Let me see if I can dock this in a better place or expand it out. Let me get this bigger here. But this allows you to see, where are my issues, right? How can I improve this? Maybe my speed index could be improved. Um, okay, now I'm like reduce unused CSS. So I can look in here and see the CSS files that I have. Maybe these CSS files I should minify together and I can save 120 kilobits of space. Maybe I need to work on my images, right? So maybe this, oh, here we go. The MVP image it's not good enough. It's a PNG. Maybe I need to change that file type. And maybe make an SVG out of it or a WebP. And this is again, Google just making recommendations on how to maximize your performance. Again, you can see most of the sites I try to build, I really try to be in the 90s. You don't have to go for perfect, but here's a good example of a decent performing site. Bearing in mind that it's done performance tuning. I try to offload the images the best I can. A lot of these images actually come from Cloudflare. So even the images here right now, the serving of them, um, while it's in my root, I can offload that up to Cloudflare and it will get cached up. So I just have my little banner image and some of the scenes in place. But I could offload those and save some more performance. But if you're in the 90s like this, you're probably doing okay. But again, Google Lighthouse, very, very powerful tool. I do something one step further. I use a Google Lighthouse API. I have a tool I developed called Poseidon. And what that does is the API has tons and tons of data points and so much more that I generate 33 pages of reports based on the Google Lighthouse API. So you've not gone to the Google Lighthouse API, I recommend checking it out. And I'll send a link for this because this is really powerful. Um, and there's a lot of cool stuff you can do here, and they have a whole API to get into place. So you can install it and run it on the as a node aspect. There's PageSpeed Insights, which is really separate of Lighthouse. Uh, here's how we just ran the Chrome extension. There's a separate one you can generate reports instead of going to inspect your page. And there's some cool stuff here as far as generating reports as JSON output. I do something a little further. I do document assembly. It is a application I built, so it takes a little more work, but that tool is very helpful. So if you're not using Lighthouse, remember PageSpeed Insights is just a point in time. So it can be challenging. And here's PageSpeed Insights. If you want to use their API, there's an API for PageSpeed Insights, bearing in mind that that's 28 days of data trailing, right? So be aware of that. And then Google Lighthouse, again, its API right here. Here's the documentation for this. I'm just going to keep chatting it in so you have it. But this is how to make a request and response for running a Lighthouse report. I'm going to chat that in as well so you have it.
So
So,
one question, like we already have
yes.
that tool to see the lighthouse effect, right? That we have the visual graphic UI stuff already there
Sure.
for as a tool. In that case, where you think we'll need this API to refer the lighthouse
So the API
result?
exposes so much more data. It actually tells you what weight everything is. So let me see if I can load up Poseidon for a second. So let me see if I can load it up. Oh, sorry, team. Trying to remember. It's here. I get the right URL for this. Hold on 1 second. And this tool that I developed is not something I can give out to the world, unfortunately. Um, but it's something where I want to show you what a sample report looks like. And we'll generate one right now. and and see what that looks like for you. Let's see if I can get over here. Oh, I need to be on network, so I can't generate this. Maybe I can show you a report as a sample. And I just want to show you the amount of data that gets produced for a Lighthouse report because it's kind of important, right? Let me grab one of these and I'll share my screen. I know this is non-traditional. It's more of a working session. So hopefully you're enjoying the working session here. Um, and it's helped you find something that can make things easier for you. All right, I'm pulling up a report right now. Okay, here's a, let me see. So I've got friends down in Florida, and one of the places we like to visit is SeaWorld. So I just ran a report for SeaWorld because I like SeaWorld. Um, so we're gonna walk through that and see what that looks like from a application performance perspective according to Lighthouse. Bearing in mind that what I've generated here is what I'm about to share is literally a Word document. So I'm using the JSON that Lighthouse API puts out to create a Word document. But all this data comes from, oh boy, SeaWorld, we gotta have some issues here. Performance is low, accessibility is okay. We got some challenges to resolve. But all this stuff here, it breaks down so much more via the API. All this content comes from the API. So the API, if you want to generate the JSON, it will tell you, you see first contextual paint all the time, but it tells you actually how much weight of your overall score that is and what components are part of that. When you do PageSpeed Insights or use Google Lighthouse in the browser, it doesn't tell you what compiles this and what the scoring is. So this tells you exactly the points that Google uses. All these points are coming from Google. So in the background of the Lighthouse that you see is this API into the actual core engine that's being used by Google. And the API itself is calling right to Google services. And it will tell you, hey, large contextual paint, you see that all the time, but you don't know how to fix it. This tells you how to fix it. Like you minify your JavaScript, reduce energy at JavaScript, right? And I've done a step further where even for prioritization, um, you can make, look at it and say, okay, performance, these are the things I need to fix first because I have zeros in my score. Therefore, if I fix these, I am getting the biggest win faster. And I just, again, look at what's inside of First Contentful Paint. I know that now because of the Lighthouse API. So again, this just gives us a lot of good stuff. All this data you see that I put into this Word document is all coming from a JSON object the Lighthouse API returns. And you can literally get pages and pages that it even describes. And Google provides this for you in the API. It tells you what to do. Here's a link to how to fix this. So it tells you what's wrong and how to fix it all the way down. And this is custom code that I use just to expose that JSON object, but all the data is there for you to use. So that's why I lean towards that API, because it can be very helpful for exposing the raw thing that Google uses for your PageSpeed insights and everything that you see today. And Dirk, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly, for sharing it. It's really helpful. So I
No
guess we are
worries.
already over time.
I'm sorry. I
Uh,
got a lot to share today, but may
yeah,
I ask a
you had a lot
question?
of things actually. So,
Uh,
but
what,
yeah, like if you
hopefully it's
have
helpful,
some,
right?
yeah, if
Go
you
ahead.
have some time, so maybe we can ask for question if anybody has any further question.
Please, I'm on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with all of you if we're not connected already. I'm a part of the Sitecore community, so you're not in Sitecore Slack. Please find me there. The Bits That Bite, I'm always there. I'm very active on Twitter as well. So Kelly JJ Rusk is my Twitter handle. So if you want to get a hold of me, I'm basically tweeting and retweeting Sitecore stuff all day long. So if you need to get a hold of me, I'm always available, and I'll do my best to help you, point you in the right direction. But I'm hoping today that at the beginning of this call and this meeting, we talked about having one theme that helped you. Um, I'm hoping that you found one thing that could help you today.
Yeah, Definitely.
Awesome. And then just thank you for your time and being willing to hear me speak about what I'm passionate about. It's a great pleasure to be associating with all of you today, and I hope you have a lovely weekend.
Thanks a lot, Kelly. Again, you gave us a pleasure because last year also we had one session from your side. Now, this year is also start with you. So it's really great. It's a great time, and I guess many people already learned so much thing from it. And as you already mentioned that you are very much active on community, and I have already seen that. So yeah, definitely we'll bug you and for any issue if come across.
Please
So
do.
thanks for it.
No worries. I'll do my best to respond as quickly as I can. And I don't know everything, but I hopefully can point you in the right direction. So you all stay safe, stay blessed, and thank you again for all that you do in our community. It's all of us working together, and I really appreciate what you do as well.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
All right,
Thanks all for joining in. Yep.
I'm gonna make my PowerPoint into a PDF, and I'll send that right along to submit right now, so you have it.
Sure. Thanks a lot for it. We'll share
All
it.
right,
Okay.
great.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Take care,
Nice.
everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye bye.